Have you ever wondered what it's like to be a prisoner of the state, not for a crime you committed, but for a title you inherited? Imagine being a young boy, barely a teenager, and suddenly finding yourself confined within the cold grey walls of a castle, not as a guest, but as a hostage in all but name. This is the story of Edward V, the boy king who vanished. What do you think happened to him and his younger brother in the Tower of London? Comment below and let me know your theories. Now, let's dive into the forgotten truths of one of England's most enduring mysteries. The year is 1483. The air is thick with the scent of blossoming roses, but the season of peace is about to be shattered. King Edward IV, a monarch known for his charm, his prowess on the battlefield, and his love of extravagant living, has died unexpectedly at the age of 40. His death leaves a gaping power vacuum and a succession crisis that will plunge England into chaos. His heir, Edward V, is just 12 years old, a boy too young to rule in his own right. By the king's last will and testament, his younger brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, is named Lord Protector. Gloucester is a man of sharp mind and sharper ambition, known for his military discipline and devout piety. He's also known to be intensely loyal to his brother, or so everyone believes. Young Edward, a solemn and intelligent boy, is travelling from Ludlow Castle, where he has been receiving his education, to London for his coronation. With him is his maternal uncle, Anthony Woodville, Earl Rivers, and a formidable retinue of the Queen's family, the Woodvilles. The Woodvilles, a family of relatively modest origins, have risen to immense power and influence through Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville. Their newfound prominence has made them a source of resentment among the old nobility, who see them as greedy upstarts. The young king's journey is interrupted by Gloucester, who, with the help of his ally, the Duke of Buckingham, intercepts the party. Citing a threat to the king's safety from the Woodvilles, Gloucester arrests Earl Rivers and several other members of the Queen's family. He then takes the young king into his custody, promising to escort him safely to London. The boy king arrives in London not in a royal procession, but as a virtual captive, with his uncle Gloucester now his sole guardian. He is installed in the Tower of London, a place that serves as both a royal residence and a prison. The young king's mother, Queen Elizabeth Woodville, flees to sanctuary at Westminster Abbey with her younger son, Richard, Duke of York, and her daughters. The Queen, a woman who has seen her family's fortunes rise and fall with the winds of court politics, now understands that a storm is brewing. Gloucester, ever the master of political theatre, begins his campaign to seize the throne. He has the Queen's family, including Earl Rivers, executed for treason. He then begins to spread rumours that Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was invalid, making their children illegitimate. He claims that his brother had a pre-contract of marriage to another woman before he married Elizabeth. Such a revelation, if true, would mean that Gloucester himself, as the last legitimate heir of the House of York, is the rightful king. The powerful Duke of Buckingham, a man with his own ambitions, sides with Gloucester. He, along with other noblemen, petitions Gloucester to take the crown. Gloucester, after a show of reluctance, agrees. He is crowned King Richard III in July 1483. Young Edward V is never crowned. He and his younger brother, Richard, Duke of York, disappear from public view. They are last seen playing in the gardens of the Tower of London. The official story is that they are being kept safe, but the truth is far more sinister. The boy's disappearance, which has become one of history's great mysteries, would give rise to countless rumors, theories, and conspiracy stories. The disappearance of the two princes, now known as the Princes in the Tower, sends a ripple of fear and suspicion throughout the kingdom. The English people, who have a strong sense of loyalty to the royal line, are deeply troubled by the fate of their young king. They whisper that Richard, the new king, has had his nephews murdered to secure his throne. The boy's mother, Queen Elizabeth Woodville, is a heartbroken and desperate woman. She remains in sanctuary at Westminster Abbey, her heart filled with fear for her missing sons. The Queen, who had once been a powerful figure at court, is now a powerless and grieving mother, forced to rely on the charity of the church for protection. Richard III's reign is short and troubled, haunted by the ghost of his missing nephews. He tries to consolidate his power, but the nobility, already suspicious of his rise to the throne, are now openly rebellious. The disappearance of the princes fuels a growing rebellion led by Henry Tudor, a distant cousin of the House of Lancaster, who has been in exile in France. In 1485, Henry Tudor invades England. At the Battle of Bosworth Field, Richard III, the last of the Plantagenet kings, is killed. Henry Tudor, now King Henry VII, is crowned, and a new dynasty, the Tudors, begins. Henry VII's ascension to the throne does not, however, solve the mystery of the princes in the Tower. The new king is in a difficult position. If the boys are dead, he must prove it. If they are alive, he must find them. To avoid any future claims to the throne, he must ensure that the princes, whatever their fate, can no longer be a threat. The mystery of the princes has spawned many theories over the centuries. Some believe that Richard III had them murdered. Others suggest that Henry VII, or even the Duke of Buckingham, was responsible. Still others believe that the boys were spirited away and lived out their lives in exile. The truth remains unknown, a dark stain on the pages of English history. What we do know for certain is that the boys' disappearance was a pivotal moment in English history. It marked the end of the Plantagenet dynasty and the beginning of the Tudor era. It also created a lasting legacy of intrigue, mystery, and speculation that continues to fascinate historians and enthusiasts to this day. The story of the princes in the Tower is a somber reminder of the brutal realities of medieval politics, where power was everything and family ties were no match for ambition. It's a story of a boy king who never ruled, a ruthless uncle who seized the throne, and a mystery that will likely never be solved. It's a story that tells us that history is not just a list of names and dates, but a complex web of human desires, betrayals, and tragedies. The coronation of Henry VII in Westminster Abbey was a moment of profound political significance. The new king, a man who had spent most of his life in exile, now held the crown of England. But his claim to the throne was tenuous, based on a distant Lancastrian lineage and his victory on the battlefield. To secure his reign, he needed to legitimize his position, and he understood that the ghost of the missing princes was his biggest threat. The public's unease about the prince's fate was a constant source of anxiety for the new king. He knew that any pretender to the throne could claim to be one of the missing boys, and he was determined to prevent such a challenge. His solution was a stroke of political genius. He would marry Elizabeth of York, the eldest daughter of Edward IV and sister to the missing princes. By marrying her, he would unite the warring houses of Lancaster and York, and his children would be the rightful heirs to both houses. The marriage of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York was a grand affair, celebrated with all the pomp and pageantry of a new dynasty. The public, weary of war, was overjoyed by the union. For them, it represented the end of the long and bloody wars of the Roses and the promise of a peaceful future. But for Elizabeth, the marriage was a bittersweet moment. She was marrying the man who had defeated her family, and the fate of her brothers remained a mystery. Elizabeth of York, a woman of great beauty and intelligence, was a crucial figure in the new Tudor dynasty. She was a bridge between the old and new, and her presence at court helped to legitimize Henry's reign. But beneath the surface of her public persona, she was a woman haunted by loss. Her letters and private writings reveal a deep sadness, a sense of grief for the brothers she had lost and the family she had seen destroyed. Henry VII's reign was marked by his efforts to consolidate power and to put an end to the lingering Plantagenet claims. He was a master of finance, and he used the wealth of the kingdom to build up a powerful navy and to create a professional army. But his greatest challenge came from a series of impostors who claimed to be one of the missing princes. The most famous of these impostors was Perkin Warbeck, a young man who claimed to be Richard, Duke of York. Warbeck's claim was so convincing that he was recognized as the rightful king by several European monarchs, including the King of Scotland and the Holy Roman Emperor. Warbeck's challenge was a serious one, and it forced Henry VII to take a hard line against anyone who supported him. Warbeck's rebellion was eventually put down, and he was captured and executed. But his story, and the stories of other impostors, kept the mystery of the princes alive. The public's willingness to believe these impostors showed that they were still deeply attached to the memory of the young king and his brother. Henry VII's reign brought a new era of stability to England, but it was a stability built on a foundation of suspicion and fear. The king was a deeply paranoid man, constantly on the lookout for traitors and conspirators. He used his secret police and a network of spies to root out any dissent, and he was ruthless in his punishment of anyone who challenged his authority. The question of what happened to the princes in the Tower remains one of the great historical debates. In 1674, during the reign of King Charles II, workers doing renovations at the Tower of London discovered a wooden chest containing the skeletons of 2 children. The remains were found under a staircase, a location that matched a rumor that the princes had been buried there. The bones were examined by a physician who determined that they belonged to 2 children of approximately the same age as the princes. The remains were interred in Westminster Abbey, and a plaque was placed at the site, stating that they were the bones of Edward V and his brother Richard. But even this discovery did not put an end to the speculation. Some historians have argued that the bones may not have belonged to the princes, and that the discovery was a politically motivated attempt to finally put the matter to rest. The mystery of the princes in the Tower continues to be a source of fascination and debate. The story has been the subject of countless books, plays, and movies, and it has inspired generations of historians and enthusiasts to search for the truth. It's a story that reminds us that the past is not always what it seems, and that the official version of events is not always the whole story. The story of Edward V and his brother is more than just a historical mystery. It's a tragedy that speaks to the fragility of power and the innocence of childhood. It's a story of a family torn apart by ambition and a kingdom plunged into chaos by a ruthless grab for power. It's a story that reminds us that even in the most opulent and powerful of courts, there are always shadows and secrets. The princes in the Tower have become a symbol of lost innocence and a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition. Their story continues to haunt the Tower of London, a silent reminder of the dark side of royal history. And for all our modern understanding, we can only imagine the fear and confusion that must have filled the hearts of those 2 young boys, trapped in a fortress that was supposed to be their home, but had become their prison. The marriage of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York was, in many ways, a forced union of 2 people bound by duty, not love. They were the key chess pieces in a game of political consolidation, a public spectacle designed to heal a wounded nation. The public saw their wedding as a symbol of peace, the blending of the red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York into the single, new Tudor rose. But behind the celebratory facade of the court, the ghost of the missing princes lingered, a silent, unsettling presence that haunted their private lives. Elizabeth of York, now Queen of England, was in an unimaginable position. She was the sister of the boys who had vanished, the daughter of a king whose legacy was being dismantled, and the wife of the man who had overthrown her family. She was intelligent and perceptive, a woman who understood the court's brutal undercurrents. She also understood that her own safety, and that of her future children, was tied directly to her husband's success. She was a queen by title, but a hostage to her circumstances by reality. Henry, for his part, was deeply suspicious and pragmatic. He saw his marriage not as a romantic partnership but as a political alliance, a means to an end. He was a man with a fragile claim to the throne, and he knew that any new claimant, particularly one who could claim to be her brother, could undo everything he had fought for. His love for Elizabeth, if it ever developed, was always secondary to his need for security. This created a profound distance between them. They were united in public, but in private, they were often solitary figures, living with their own separate fears and anxieties. Elizabeth's life at court was a constant balancing act. She had to navigate the intricate web of Tudor politics while grieving for her missing brothers. The new king's mother, Lady Margaret Beaufort, was a formidable presence who had held the Lancastrian cause together for decades. She was fiercely protective of her son and often sidelined Elizabeth, asserting her authority in matters of court and state. Elizabeth was reduced to a public figurehead, the beloved queen, while Margaret wielded true power behind the scenes. As years passed, and Elizabeth gave birth to Henry's heirs, first Prince Arthur and then Prince Henry, the pressure on her lessened slightly. The birth of a male heir, and then a spare, secured the Tudor line and made her a vital part of the dynasty. Yet, the persistent threat of impostors claiming to be one of her brothers remained a major challenge. The Perkin-Warbeck Rebellion, in particular, was a source of deep personal distress for Elizabeth. She was forced to publicly denounce the man claiming to be her brother, a position that must have torn at her heart. She was loyal to her husband and her children, but she could not simply forget the boys she had loved. The truth of what happened to the princes was an open secret that no one dared to speak. Henry and his council were almost certainly aware of the boys' fate, but they were determined to bury the matter. Elizabeth, however, was likely a key part of the information network. She may have been kept in the dark initially, but it is highly probable that she was eventually told the truth, or at least a version of it. The discovery of the two small skeletons in the Tower's White Tower in 1674, while long after the fact, did provide a powerful, if macabre, confirmation for later generations. Ultimately, the marriage of Henry and Elizabeth was a success in political terms. They produced heirs, united a warring kingdom, and established a powerful new dynasty. But it was a relationship built on the foundation of a great and unsolved mystery, and on the silenced grief of a queen who had lost her family in the name of peace. Their story is a powerful reminder that behind the grand narratives of history, there are always private lives and personal tragedies, and that the cost of power is often paid in silent sorrows and broken hearts. The early years of Henry VII's reign, despite the triumphant union with Elizabeth of York, were anything but secure. The king was a man haunted by the fragility of his position. He had seized the throne through force of arms, and his claim was, by all accounts, weaker than many others. The ghost of the missing princes, therefore, was not merely a tragic story but a constant, tangible threat to his power. This fear manifested in a calculated and often brutal paranoia that defined his rule. Henry's court was a place of quiet tension. His spies were everywhere, and the king himself was a master of intrigue, using his network of informants to root out any whisper of rebellion or disloyalty. The memory of the Wars of the Roses, where loyalties had shifted with terrifying speed and noble houses had been extinguished overnight, was a fresh wound in the collective memory of the English elite. Henry, who had spent years in exile, had a deep-seated distrust of the English nobility, and he was determined not to be overthrown as his predecessors had been. For Elizabeth of York, the atmosphere of suspicion was a constant source of sorrow. She was the human embodiment of the Tudor claim, the living bridge between the houses of York and Lancaster, but she was also a woman caught between two worlds. The nobles who had supported her father were now her husband's subjects, and the man who had defeated her family was now the father of her children. She was a gracious and popular queen, beloved by the people for her beauty and her gentle nature. But she was a private figure, often described as melancholy, with a sadness that seemed to lie just beneath the surface. Her grief for her brothers was a private affair, an unspoken sorrow that she carried with her throughout her life. In a court where all of her family's history had been meticulously erased or reinterpreted to suit the new regime, she could not openly mourn the princes. It was an act of loyalty to her husband to accept the new reality, but an act of betrayal to her own heart. Historians have speculated that she and Henry may have reached a silent understanding. He gave her a secure life, a family, and the crown she was born to wear, but at the cost of her past. She, in turn, gave him the legitimacy he so desperately needed, and the children to secure his dynasty. The persistent threat of impostors, particularly Perkin-Warbeck, was the ultimate test of this fragile arrangement. When Warbeck, a young Flemish man, appeared in Europe claiming to be Richard, Duke of York, the younger of the two missing princes, the effect on the court was devastating. Warbeck's physical resemblance to the York family was so striking that he convinced many European monarchs and English nobles of his claim. He was a living, breathing challenge to the entire Tudor dynasty. For Elizabeth, this must have been an excruciating ordeal. The man claiming to be her brother was not just a political threat to her husband, but a personal torment. Could it be him? A part of her must have desperately wanted to believe it, to hope that her brother had somehow survived. But the political reality was clear. She could not, and would not, support him. To do so would have meant the end of her husband's reign, the downfall of her children, and a return to the bloody civil war she had just escaped. She was forced to publicly condemn the man and support her husband's brutal campaign to destroy his claim. Warbeck's eventual execution in 1499, after years of rebellion and intrigue, was a moment of profound significance for the Tudors. It signaled the final end of the Plantagenet line and the conclusive triumph of the Tudor dynasty. The execution was a public and unmistakable message to the world. There were no more princes. The mystery was over. But for Elizabeth, the end of the Warbeck saga did not bring peace. It likely brought a new and more final wave of grief. The last faint hope that one of her brothers might have survived was extinguished. She would live for a few more years, a queen who had fulfilled her duty to the state and her husband. She gave birth to a total of 7 children, though only 4 survived infancy. She died in 1503, shortly after the birth of her last child, a daughter named Catherine. She was just 37 years old. Henry VII was, by all accounts, profoundly affected by her death. The pragmatic king who had married for politics had, over the years, grown to love the graceful and loyal woman who had been his wife. He had her buried in Westminster Abbey with all the honours befitting a true Queen of England and the mother of his heir. The story of the princes in the Tower and the fate of Elizabeth of York remains a poignant example of the human cost of power. She was a woman who navigated a dangerous and unforgiving world with remarkable grace and resilience. She was the symbol of peace, the mother of a dynasty, and the silent, sorrowful sister of 2 boys who vanished. Her life was a testament to the fact that even in the highest echelons of power, some wounds can never be healed, and some mysteries can never be forgotten. Her role was to bring an end to one historical era, the Plantagenet, and to give birth to another, the Tudor, a role she played with dignity and an unshakable, though silent, grief that remains one of the most compelling and tragic stories of the English monarchy.